Dr. Carla Barnet, Secretary General of CARICOM, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States, distinguished ambassadors and permanent representatives to the OAS, esteemed heads and representatives of regional organizations, invited guests in our virtual audience, OAS representatives and colleagues at headquarters and in the national offices, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to all. I am Kendall Bilal, advisor to the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS, and it is my distinct honor to deliver opening remarks at today's special edition of A Chat with the OAS, which is being presented under the theme, Caribbean Women Changing the World, a fitting tribute to the countless trailblazing and pioneering Caribbean women who have achieved immeasurable success in their respective fields. Today, I am particularly honored to recognize our guest of honor, Dr. Carla Barnet, the 8th Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, and the first woman and first Belizean to hold this distinguished post. I myself, a Belizean and daughter of Caribbean soil, have been heavily influenced by the career path and notable accomplishments of Dr. Barnet in her positions as a former senator, Minister of State, a revered economist, and now the fearless leader of our Caribbean community. Dr. Barnet stands on the shoulders of numerous Caribbean women whose defiance and courage in the face of adversity sparked revolutions and disrupted antiquated patriarchal systems. The world as we know it has been forever changed by the sheer determination and stoic actions of these Caribbean women who today occupy valuable space in decision-making positions in their roles as heads of state and government, leaders of international organizations, chief executive officers of multinational companies, heads of renowned institutions, successful entrepreneurs, and doting mothers and caretakers, just to name a few. Today, we look forward with great anticipation to the sage words of wisdom and insightful commentary to be shared by Dr. Barnet, who in her own right exemplifies the persona of a strong, courageous, and accomplished Caribbean woman, and whose achievements will no doubt leave an indelible mark on our region. Without further ado, I now hand over the floor to Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General of the OAS, who will provide brief welcoming remarks. A.C. Mendez, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kendall. And Dr. Barnet, it's wonderful to see you again. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. Distinguished ambassadors and permanent representatives to the OAS, esteemed heads and representatives of regional organizations, invited guests in our virtual audience, OAS representatives, and colleagues at headquarters in the national offices, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Having only just closed out the month which celebrates women internationally, and in which women are recognized and applauded for the profound impact of their contribution to the world, we acknowledge the balance and amplification they bring to the fount of ideas in the corporate, government, and organizational spheres. I am delighted to welcome to A Chat with the OAS, a pioneering woman, a thinker, a doer, the first female Secretary General of CARICOM, Dr. Carla Barnet. Welcome, Dr. Barnet, to this space for information sharing, for generating a conversation for awareness about how the OAS works collaboratively within the CARICOM space and in the Americas broadly. This chat is themed Caribbean Women Changing the World and was originally conceptualized for airing during the month of March. We are confident, notwithstanding, that any juncture would be just as fitting to celebrate your historical rise to the helm of CARICOM and to thank you for your contribution to this sub-region and the cementing of its place of prominence on the global front. March was also the month in which we commemorated the just concluded 5th Inter-American Week for People of African Descent in the Americas and highlighted the invaluable work and accomplishments of Afro-descendants in the hemisphere. We celebrate you today as a woman and an Afro-Caribbean trailblazer. And we look forward to learning more about your professional trajectory and the work in which you are engaged as Secretary General of CARICOM. A chat with the OAS opens a most useful space for delving a little deeper into the story of remarkable individuals such as yourself, in the hope that our people can be informed, inspired, and invested in the salient points ventilated in these fora. We certainly look forward to hearing from you, Secretary General. But first, a conversation to glean some insights that will precede your presentation. We'd like to learn a little more about you. Secretary General, you are certainly an inspiration to young people in the Caribbean and to their parents, who in their lifetime have witnessed a woman rise to prominence at the very helm of the oldest surviving integration movement in the developing world. Incredibly, by the time you took up a position within the CARICOM Secretariat, you had already blazed a trail nationally as the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Belize. Can you please take us back to the dreams Carla Barnet held as a Caribbean youth? Speak to your impressive professional trajectory and share with us any goals you still aspire to as the change agent that you are. Also, March, International Women's Month, represented the 6-month marker in this position. Congratulations. In your statement commemorating Women's Day this year, you stressed the need to increase opportunities and reduce stumbling blocks to women and girls so that they can be equal partners in solving many of the issues impacting the region. How will you use your voice and mandate as CARICOM Secretary General to advise this goal? And finally, you are in the leadership space you occupy at the most critical moment in history. New technologies have taught us that in our most dire moments, we can maintain connections and engage in policy framing dialogue, even when we're not physically assembled in the same space. As we look to post-pandemic recovery and the challenges to be overcome, the people of the CARICOM region are full of expectations for us to build on the lessons learned. Can you share your perspectives about how you and your team can reinterpret the job of CARICOM Secretary General to respond to the post-pandemic mandate for recovery, utilizing the public platform and available channels to inform, interact, and advise so that CARICOM emerges a reinvigorated region? And finally, how would you like history to record your legacy and to speak to your contribution to the region? Dr. Barnet, Secretary General, I am pleased to offer the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Nestor. You asked me a pack of questions there. So my first question to you would be, how much time do we have? There's a lot here to talk about. And your first set of questions were really around my very early years. You asked me to take us back to when I was a Caribbean youth, a young person. And the honest truth would have to be that as a youngster, I could not have had any idea in my mind that this is where I would be at this stage in my life. I just knew coming up, because of the parents that I had, that I needed to work hard to get ahead in life. And so I made choices. I decided to do the best I could in school. And I did, and I moved on. One of the most important decisions that I made coming out of sixth form in Belize, I decided to go to the University of the West Indies. I could have gone other places. I chose University of the West Indies in part because I would be going to Mona campus, and my father family came from Jamaica. And so there was this desire to find out a little bit more about my past, about finding out what the interrelationships among Caribbean countries would have been. And so I went to study in Jamaica, and in Jamaica, I met colleagues, students from all across the Caribbean region. I lived on Mary Seacole Hall, and those in the audience who know Mona Campus know that Mary Seacole is the first of all, it's the all-female hall on campus. But then Mary Seacole was a very important woman in her own right in terms of the role she played historically. And so I learned about Mary Seacole, and I began to learn about women in the Caribbean, women of Caribbean heritage who have gone on to do great things in this world. Coming out of the University of the West Indies, I would have to tell you at that point, I was a Belizean, but I was also very much a Caribbean person because of all of the experiences there. And even though I came home to Belize and I began to do my work and went back to do graduate school and all of that, my perspective as a Caribbean person was formulated in my university years at a Caribbean university, at the University of the West Indies, which really represented a coming together of young people from all across the region. So for me, that was seminal. You asked me about reducing stumbling blocks to women and girls. I did in my Women's Day statement speak to reducing stumbling blocks to enable women to be equal partners. And I've been known to tell my colleagues in women's organizations that I'm a part of in Belize, and I've said it at the regional level as well. We have been saying this for many, many years. If I go back to the very first statement I would have made when I was here as Deputy Secretary General and read what I said on International Women's Day 20 years ago, it would have been similar kinds of sentiment. And I say that because whenever we talk about the strides we are making, we always have to remember that while we may be making strides at some levels, there are also significant hindrances that keep women back from playing a proper, more equitable role in society. And so one of the things that I want to do, first of all, I am very much aware of the fact that I am a sort of example to other women, and particularly to young women coming up. But the reason why I am an example is because, and I can never ever forget that, I am in the minority of women who have managed to make it through really difficult processes of moving up. And it's so I cannot take that for granted. I cannot take that as a symbol that things have changed significantly. I take it as a responsibility to speak about the reality of the struggles that women still face at every level, from the on the ground level in their homes and communities, to women who are in the professional sphere and seeking to move up and take on responsibilities that are in keeping with their capabilities. And therefore, I continue to speak about the need for us to change that. I continue to speak about the need to ensure that women are seen as equal partners, because the reality is that in most spaces, women are still not seen as equal partners. And I've been known to say to some of my male colleagues, and I say male colleagues because in most of the tables I've sat around for the last 20 years at least, it's always been mostly men around the table. And I've been known to say to them, you see the mess that the world is in, women have never been in charge. That's the reality. So if we were to ascribe blame, then we can go down that road, but I prefer to put it in the positive and say there is a role that women can play peace brokers, as policy makers, as planners and visionaries, that we have to recognize that if we want the world to change, we have to find a way for women to play those roles that they have not really adequately been allowed to play over the years. So for me, it's to ensure that women get to play that role, because I think it would mean a fundamental change in the way we govern our communities, the way we govern our institutions, the way we govern our political parties, and the way we govern our countries, if women were to play a role that was more equitable and more in keeping with women's capabilities. Because sometimes people forget that in this so-called caregiving role that we are traditionally expected to play, one of the important things that we learn very early is how to communicate, how to broker peace in the play yard, how to ensure that our girl children get support as they need to, in order to go against the tendency to relegate women to particular very narrow realms of operation that have traditionally been the places where women are expected to play their role. So I don't know, Nestor, if I've confused enough, but that's, as I say, I don't see it as, I have been able to achieve what I have been able to achieve because of the women who came before, and I can never forget that. Because I am here, I know that there is a certain desire for me to accept, and I do accept the role as an example for young women, but I never want it to be seen as women having broken through generally this so-called glass ceiling, and therefore the work is done. The work is just really beginning.
Great. Dr. Barnet, can you talk to us a little about your present professional post now, about what you're doing at the CARICOM Secretariat and how you're planning to transform that institution that is so important for the region?
Well, sure, we can talk about that. The first thing I would say is that there is, it is a role that I'm expected to lead, but I never for one day assume that it is something I can do by myself. So I have to be in a place where I am encouraging all my staff, where I am encouraging and pushing for us to do things a little bit differently than we've done it in the past, because we do want to be able to meet the challenge of implementing our single market in particular with greater urgency. And that requires us to work a little bit differently. And what do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, that we need to bring all stakeholders on board. And so one of the things that I am encouraging, that I am pushing for, is for us to involve persons and groups, interest groups that we may not have been having conversations with in the past, such as a wider cross-section of our NGO community, a wider cross-section of our private sector, our labor organizations, in order to ensure that the persons who are supposed to be benefiting from this integration process have a greater knowledge of what we're trying to achieve, a greater participation, own it a little bit more, so that we can together try to do the work of building CARICOM as a group. It's not a secretariat activity, it's a community activity. And so all groups in the community need to own and feel a part of the process. This means that we need to, and we are making changes to the way we communicate. One of the things I have done is have more interactions with the media. more conversations like this. In Women's Month, I was a part of at least 4 or 5 different panels. And at one point I found myself saying to the women I was talking with, it makes me realize that there really are few of us who can really talk about ascending to the top, because I got so many invitations. It's because there's not that many people to invite who have managed to rise to the top of organizations. And so I recognize that, and I'm participating as much as I can in public conversations, interactions with the media, and encouraging as well internally within the Secretariat that we not only discuss a lot more and talk a lot more about the things that we're working on, but between the Secretariat and member states and groups, so that we can keep this conversation alive and they have the general public feel that they are a part of what we're trying to do. As we talk about post-pandemic recovery, there are a couple of things that we will not stop advocating for. The most important of which would have to be equity both in terms of how we treat with pandemic response, because there is a general view that this is not the first and it will not be the last pandemic. And some of the things that arose during this pandemic, such as the inequitability in access to vaccines and access to the equipment and the protective gear early o'clock, that's something that we have to make sure that we have better arrangements in the future, so that it does not become so difficult for us to respond. As we speak, we now have better access to vaccines, but the argument can be made that this is late in the game, that we should have had the access upfront when the vaccines began to be made more available so that we could treat more effectively. The result of which is that the growing anti-vaccination discussion has now permeated broadly, and it is becoming more difficult for us to encourage demand for vaccinations. And so that's another discussion for another time. But the general message is that in the future, we have to be sure that when we're treating with pandemic response, we globally treat it as a matter of global concern, so that intergovernmental agencies where they need to be involved can get involved, so that there is a more equitable approach to treating with vaccines, with treatments, with all of that. The second thing that I would say is that post-pandemic recovery needs to focus heavily on the impact of climate change on our economies. COVID dealt us a very difficult blow. All of us who are dependent on tourism, we lost income to individuals, we lost revenue to governments, we lost jobs that we are trying to recreate now that the countries are reopening. But you cannot regain income lost. What we can try to do is grow on the basis of what we know are the policies, the processes that we need to put in place. And so as we move ahead, we have to make sure that we treat with the fact that climate change is now the threat to our long-term sustainable development. It was before. We may have been distracted by COVID. It is now, for me, the single most important thing that we have to treat with. The impact from a science point of view, the fact that if we don't keep global warming in check, if we don't find a way for the big countries that cause emissions to reduce those emissions so that we can see the global temperature rise be in a more, I don't know, we just need to control global temperature. In CARICOM, we say 1.5 to stay alive, well, we live by that. And we know that we will die if that is exceeded, because it's an existential threat from a scientific point of view to our ability to maintain our countries, maintain our societies. The global temperature rise that's causing sea level to rise, we will lose a larger portion of our coastlines. We already are losing that. And we will lose a significant portion of our ability to engage in agriculture in particular, but not only agriculture. Our economy generally will continue to bear the heavy burden of climate change. There's a big discussion globally about treating more equitably with the impact of climate change and helping countries to address the impact of climate change. And yes, that is absolutely very important, because we don't cause the global warming. We bear the burden in our countries of the impact of global warming. And I keep telling certainly my staff internally, but also wherever I have the opportunity, that this bearing the financial cost of climate change, it is not something that is coming to us. It is something that we have been experiencing for at least the last 20 years. Anybody who's been involved in working through infrastructure projects, for example, know that we have to borrow a significantly greater amount of money this year to build a mile of road than we would have borrowed 20 years ago to build a mile of road. Why? Because we have to build in for the future climate change, rising waters. We have to build in for the future more hurricanes that's going to be already destroying our infrastructure. That's another cost. We have been bearing this cost already. So when our region talks about climate justice, this is the fact of life. This is what we need to address frontally to ensure that people understand this isn't something that's coming. This is something that we are already living. What is coming is the threat to our continued existence, but the impact of climate change on our economies, our societies, on our physical infrastructure, all of that is already being experienced, and it's being experienced in an inequitable way. So we have to find a way to address that impact more equitably. And we like to talk, there's a big, what I call academic conversation about the usefulness of a vulnerability index. For me, it's not a question about whether it's useful, it's a question about understanding that it's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary from the point of view of ensuring that as we bear the biggest costs of climate change, that we do not cause access to financing to address that impact has to be equitable. And at this stage, it is not equitable. So we want to continuously advocate for justice in terms of equity of access to financing the impact of climate change. And to the extent that we have a voice in whichever forum, whether it's at the OAS, it's at the IMF and the World Bank, it's at the IDB, it's in the OECD countries, wherever we have a voice that we can speak, wherever we can organize and seek support for that position, we will continue to press that case, because our future really does depend on it across this region and across all SIDS. It's not only Caribbean SIDS, it's Pacific SIDS as well. It's the low-lying coastal states that are seeing their coastlines already being eroded as we have tides rising and more storms passing through our region. So there you go.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Barnet, for that illustration of the big challenges you're facing at the helm of CARICOM. You spoke about moving to implement the CARICOM single market and economy. You spoke also about climate change as an existential threat to the CARICOM countries, clearly. And all of this combined with the need to move beyond the pandemic and to recover our economies. We spoke about how heavily impacted the war because of their dependence, many of the CARICOM states on tourism. And we saw that in Belize as well, how it was hit badly. Could you also talk a little about, what are some of the particular things that you will be doing as Secretary General of CARICOM to address these issues? And more importantly, how do you want to be remembered? What do you see as your legacy as the first woman? You spoke about women being, the peace brokers in the playground from early on. They are the ones who have new ideas, see the world differently. Can you talk to us about what you view as your legacy?
I think it's a little bit early to talk about legacy, Nestor. My approach generally is that I try to do the best I can wherever I am. And at this stage, the best I can is to see how I can complete to a reasonable level the reforms we've begun within this institution so that we work more effectively, so that we are better engaged with our region, so that we can focus on the strategic priorities that we've identified, and critical among these is treating with the impact of climate change. Resilience is a critical thing we like to talk about, and resilience generally meaning resilience in terms of our economic capabilities, resilience in terms of our social survival, resilience in terms of our community as a whole being able to respond to the challenges as they arise. And therefore, my going into this is to see how I, together with my team here and together with the councils of the community, can help to strengthen this region's resilience across the board. That is what it is about. We'll talk about legacy when we get to that time, but right now it's about pushing up the sleeves and getting to work. And so that's what we're trying to do here, to focus on those things that are absolutely critical if we want to contribute towards this resilience building across our community.
Very good. Dr. Barnett, are there any other remarks, any other ideas you would like to share? For us at the OAS, the Caribbean constituency is a very important block, and the issues that you have illustrated are clearly issues that the OAS also deals with, and that is why it's so important that our organizations work together in pursuit of the objectives that our shared constituencies have entrusted to us. Any other comments you would like to share, other issues that you're working with that you see as critical?
Well, Nestor, the reality is that we are trying to ensure that we improve our working together with a variety of agencies and institutions, including, of course, the OAS. But we want to strengthen our strategic engagement wherever we are, because we know that we are at that point in time where there are no resources to waste. Accessing resources is becoming more and more challenging because COVID affected everybody across the board. So everybody is being more careful. And so from a point of view of efficiency, from a point of view of strategic collaboration, we are setting out to collaborate wherever strategically it makes sense for us to do that in the interest of long-term sustainable development and the resilience that we've been talking about. So yes, we want to work closely with all our agencies, including the OAS, and our ambassadors at the OAS are on the ground ensuring that they do what they need to do to keep our issues on the table wherever they need to be on the table. And so we give a little trouble in some places, but sometimes trouble is good. So that's the way we are. We will continue to work wherever we are located, whether in Washington, in Brussels, in London, in wherever we are, in order to ensure that the interests of this region are advanced in a way that's clear, cogent, and focused on ensuring that we put the priorities of CARICOM, the Caribbean countries that are around the table with us, at the forefront all the time. That's what it is about. That's what we are supposed to be doing, and that's what our ambassadors in these various capitals set out to do. And they cooperate and collaborate together because we all recognize the importance of working together.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Barnet. And I don't think you give any problem at all. Speaking in defense of issues that are.
You're a good diplomatic Belizean.
It's legitimate to speak about the issues that are important to the region. Secretary General, your presentation on the path you have blazed to this history-making role and the information shared about CARICOM and the Secretariat under your charge now positions us to appreciate the gamut of responsibilities you shoulder. We have been duly edified. I applaud your work for the advancement of the people of CARICOM, of which, as I mentioned, 14 countries are represented among the membership of the OAS. This organization also places the highest value on securing for the people of all countries of this hemisphere, including those of CARICOM, the advancement of human rights, the strengthening of democratic values, and the promotion of policies which underpin the pillars of multidimensional security and integral development. I place on record the organization's thanks for CARICOM's commitment to collaboration on areas of mutual interest, cemented in the MOU it holds with the OAS, and on which work is currently underway to update its scope for even greater impact to bear. For its part, the OAS will continue to work with CARICOM as we deliver in traditional areas for socioeconomic growth and define new pathways for post-pandemic sustainable recovery that will impact all people, including the opening of opportunities for creative enterprise and entrepreneurship for youth and for women and girls. Thank you so much, Secretary General. Now, I would like to hand over to Ambassador Jacinth Henry Martin, who will offer brief closing remarks. Jazz?
Thank you very much, SG. I am not sure if it's my time to do the closing remarks. I know we had been anticipating a wonderful presentation by SG Barnet. I'm not sure, SG Barnet, if you're available to do it now, or if you'd like me to close off, but we would love to hear.
I do have, I don't know about a wonderful presentation, but I do have a few prepared remarks that I would have wanted to share. So if you want me to do that now, I think it's about 15 minutes or so. So, okay, all right. Let me then, first of all, thank Ambassador Mendes. It's my pleasure. It has been my pleasure to chat with you. You've been a friend of mine for a long time, and as a Belizean also, we've had reason to be officially engaged. So it's my pleasure to chat with you today. And even more so, given that the focus of our discussion is on the role of women. Last month, the Global Observation of International Women's Day recognized the achievements of women around the world and brought attention to the challenges women still face due to gender discrimination. We recognize that progress has been made towards gender equality, but acknowledge that there is still much work to be done. In some places, meaningful change is evident, while in other places, change has been slow and uneven. There has been increasing attention to the emergence of women in roles where they have been traditionally absent in most societies. And in the Caribbean, this is no exception. While there has been good progress for women in assuming more senior management positions in the public and the private sectors, women are still notably very few in top leadership positions in both business and politics. So the glass ceiling, so-called, is very much in place. There is research that shows that of the employees with university degrees, over 60% are women in the Caribbean and are holding upper and middle income positions in the public and the private sectors. When you consider that at the University of the West Indies, female enrollment is more than double that of the males, and in some of our countries, according to the ILO, women represent more than 70% of all tertiary graduates, you would expect this to be reflected in the executive positions. It is encouraging that the ILO report singled out the Caribbean as a world leader in terms of women being prevalent at the managerial level, with 8 out of 11 countries reporting that 40% or more of all managers were women. And Jamaica reported the highest proportion of women managers in the world at 59%. But the reality is, despite these statistics, women are still not to be found in similar numbers in the most senior and top executive positions. The share of women managers decreases in the most senior positions significantly. The survey reported that women represented 30% of managers in junior and middle and senior levels, but only 10% of managers in top executive roles. Within the political structures and systems, we currently have 1 woman head of government, the Honorable Mia Mottley of Barbados, and we have only had 4 other women heads of government over the past 40 years. These are Dame Mary Eugenia Charles of Dominica, Janet Jagan of Guyana, Portia Simpson Miller of Jamaica, and Kamla Parsad Bisesar of Trinidad and Tobago. And I call their names because they're still very unique in the positions that they've held. There are a few women who are at the top of regional international organizations at this time, such as Catherine Pollard, who is serving as Under Secretary General of the UN for Management Strategy and Policy Compliance, Dr. Carissa Etienne, who is the Director of PAHO, Pamela Cook Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center, Patricia Scotland, who is the Commonwealth Secretary General, Elizabeth Riley, who is the Executive Director of SEDIMA, and Dr. Joy St. John, who is the Executive Director of CARFA. And I call their names because the fact that I can call all these names of all the women in these positions in such a short period of time, we know that there is a lot more work that we need to do. Even as we celebrate their personal accomplishments, we know that there is a lot more that we can do to have more women play their role in international and regional organizations. I always say that when it is not unusual for a woman to be appointed in some place, when we can stop saying woman Secretary General or woman, we have to be able to acknowledge that it is not an unusual situation. And when we reach there, we will know that we have made real change. But before we want to think that we are an exception to what is happening elsewhere, this is the story across the globe. The International Parliamentary Union reports that the global average of women, for example, in national parliaments was 23% in 2016. In our region, Dominica, Grenada, and Trinidad are among the countries where women ministers represent or exceed the UN's initial target of at least 30% representation in parliament. What is equally telling is that there are only 3 women leading political parties in the region, and 2 of them are in Barbados. The question has to be asked, what is the hindrance to that upward mobility to the highest levels in business and in politics if it is not gender discrimination? I speak from my own political involvement as a political candidate, a former senator, and a former minister of state. The systemic inequalities coupled with a patriarchal system that does not recognize the barriers to women's political engagement account for the lack of critical mass of women in political decision-making across the region. Women's political empowerment and equal access to leadership positions at all levels are fundamental to gender equality. In the majority of CARICOM member states, men still strongly dominate agricultural occupations, plant and machine operators, while women dominate clerical positions. Inequalities are also still evident in the participation of women and girls in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are subjects which continue to be male-dominated. The perspective that women's roles are and should be limited to childbearing and rearing and caregiving is changing, but it is still too prevalent. And while it persists, it hinders the transformation towards gender equality and the equal balance of power. This inequity, this unequalness in the balance of power is one major factor in relation to gender-based violence. Although globally, 1 in 3 women continues to be affected by the silent pandemic of gender-based violence, usually at the hands of an intimate partner. In the Caribbean region, prevalence surveys conducted recently indicate that the incidence rate could be as high as 1 in 2. Over the last 3 decades, it's largely women's organizations that have been working tirelessly, setting up crisis centers, shelters, and advocating for women, for victims and survivors, while supporting governments in the process of legal reform to ensure enhanced protection and strengthen legislation to enable women to live lives free of violence. While all member states have some form of domestic violence legislation, there are gaps in the sexual offenses laws, and a few countries have legislative schemes directly addressing sexual harassment. So there is still a lot of work to be done if we are to make even greater inroads towards gender equality in our region and therefore across the world. We as women have a duty to lead the charge and be the change agents in that regard. Legislation alone will not achieve the goal, but it requires an all of society action to serve as a powerful driver in the quest for true equality. So all hands on deck. Thank you very much, Nestor, for inviting me to be here and for allowing me to exchange these views with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time, Dr. Barnet. As usual, it's wonderful. Congratulations on the work we're doing. And now I will hand over to Ambassador Jacinth Henry Martin, who is an advisor in my office. She's also the coordinator of our network of national offices, OAS national offices across our member states. Jazz, please.
Thank you very much, ASG. Dr. Carla Barnet, our panelist and guest of honor. In the interest of time, I'm pleased to recognize everyone in the virtual audience through adoption of the earlier established protocol. The honor falls to me to thank you, Dr. Barnet, firstly for making the time to sit with us today, and then for the candor and aplomb with which you reflected on your path to the heights which you have attained. Your presentation was a reflection on your organization, a lesson on its current reality, and a pivot aspirationally to delivering on the work ahead. You have set a pace for young women and indeed for ambitious young men for us to fully expect of Caribbean trailblazers and to push for in their own endeavors. Your story is a testament to the fact that success is born of dreams, buttressed by hard work, perseverance, and lifelong learning, and that those aspirations are given wings when we refuse to rest on our laurels. Thank you, Dr. Barnet, for being an exemplary daughter of the Americas and a responsive warrior for the CARICOM region, wherever duty requires you to defend those interests in the global arena. The CARICOM Secretariat can be reassured of the solidarity of the OAS and its full appreciation of the synergies that exist in the work they are both called to execute, including the work of the Inter-American Commission of Women. For its part, the OAS continues to expand its role and relevance across the hemisphere to ensure that citizens of the Americas are provided opportunities to live in secure democratic societies in which their human rights are respected and in which they are afforded avenues for socioeconomic advancement through education and other catalysts for sustainable development. Our combined efforts will continue to tackle impediments to the realization of these imperatives and to create bridges to success for the people of CARICOM and for the broader hemisphere covering the membership of the OAS. As coordinator of the national offices, I underscore the integral support of the OAS national offices in this regard and reiterate their role in delivering on the work of the organization in the member states. I reference the overarching theme of Caribbean women changing the world. Adding to this demographic Dr. Carla Barnet, a stellar Caribbean thought leader, a woman who is definitely changing the world. The contribution of women to arming our societies with robust, enduring solutions ensures that we move faster, build stronger, and advance more inclusively and steadfastly, optimizing the wellspring of all ideas and talents, including those of our Caribbean sisters. Who better, after all, than those who have managed households, nurtured communities, climbed every corporate, social, and professional ladder, and now have stepped up to change the world. Dr. Barnet, members of the virtual audience, hardworking team of the OAS, responsible for coordinating today's chat, you have all been vital to the success of today's edition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Henry Martin. And Dr. Barnet, thank you once again for taking the time to be with us. I think you're an inspiration, and we look forward to continue working with you. Both the OAS and CARICOM have an important role to play for our people. So thank you very much.
And thank you again for having me. It's been my pleasure entirely.